All right. Hello, everyone. I am Duren. I'm the host of Changing the Game. Changing the Game was created to share leadership insights and inspiration from female professionals who are making a difference in their industry. Today, I am joined by Jess Spangler. Jess is the VP of Sales at Workshop. Workshop is an internal communications platform headquartered in Omaha and is one of Nebraska's fastest growing startups. She started as sales rep number one, and she has built the team to 21 sales members today as their VP of Sales. She also has over 15 years of sales experience. And Jess, I got to say this, I can personally comment on her competitiveness from attending some cycle bar classes together. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today.
I'm excited to have you here too. Jess and I met probably, like 4 years ago now, probably.
Yeah.
Which is just like kind of gross to say. I can't believe it's been that long already. It feels like it was yesterday.
I remember I joined like right around COVID, just as like an outlet to have something, outside of work and with everything going on. And you taught amazing classes. I always enjoyed your classes there.
Thanks, Jess. I miss teaching spin, honestly. I miss even just going to classes. I haven't been in so long. So I got to find a cycle bar out here in Denver maybe to go to.
Yes, you should.
I love it. I love it. Thanks so much, Jess. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today. Your sales experience is so awesome. I know you're going to have amazing insights for all of our listeners and our candidates here at Shift Group. So I kind of want to set the stage, bring us back to the beginning. Did you always have that competitive drive growing up? Did you play sports? What were you like?
Yeah. So I did play a lot of sports actually growing up, but I don't think I would have ever classified myself as competitive, honestly. Like I would have never described myself as competitive. I was always really drawn to sports because of kind of like the team nature of it, right? Like being part of a team and the camaraderie and kind of like getting to celebrate and win together. And I just loved kind of that team unity that sports brought to my life. And so, yeah, I played like basketball and cross country and track, and I'm not a good athlete like at all. I was so bad at all of those sports, but again, to me it was more about like the team aspect and the team camaraderie that sports brought to my life that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like there are so many other things besides competitiveness that sports can teach us, and certainly lessons that I'm sure you've probably brought into your role as VP of sales. And I want to touch on that in a little bit, but I do want to know kind of your transition from your college career to your professional career. And did you always have this inkling that you wanted to be in sales?
Yeah, I like to tell people that I kind of fell into sales by accident, honestly. I had never planned to be in sales or in business. Quite frankly, I never even took a business class in college. And I was one of those people that I really didn't know what I wanted to do after college. And so I had a major in Spanish, and I had went on to do my master's degree in psychology. And through that, ended up working at a university. It was a for-profit university as an admissions rep, which essentially was a sales job. Like I had a quota of how many students I had to enroll every month. And, before you know it, I kind of just fell into it and started doing it and realized like, hey, this is actually something I really enjoy and get a lot of fulfillment out of. And I feel like my background in psychology and some of the things that I did in school really do apply in sales. Like at the end of the day, sales is a very people-centric, people-oriented type of role. And a lot of it is around the psychology of like what motivates people to buy or to move forward with a decision. So I've used a lot of that in my career, I feel like, but I never really set out or intended to be in sales. And started that path and kind of just have kept going with it because it's something that I do feel like I get a lot of fulfillment out of having kind of those clear-cut goals and metrics that you can aim for, which is what I learned about myself as transitioning from that kind of college to professional working world is like, you learn a lot about like the things that motivate you and drive you. And for me, it was like having goals that were very clear and black and white that I knew I could, attain or go for.
Yeah. So how did you end up in sales then? Not studied business. I work with a lot of candidates here at Shift Group actually who are like, I've never taken a business class. I'm a psych major, so many of them. And I try to tell them like, hey, that's actually a big benefit to you.
It is, yeah.
Sales. So how did you land that role in sales to start your career journey? And I kind of want to know like what advice you would have for candidates who don't have a business background going into sales.
Yeah. Honestly, I was really fortunate to have really good mentors in my career. And so one of my first jobs out of college, I worked alongside, he was a business professor at the university that I was at, and he left to go to a tech startup actually. And when he left to go to the tech startup, he was like, hey, you should consider coming over. They're going to start an account management team. You'd be the first account manager. It's a really cool, fun, like back then it was all the like, ping pong and beer in the fridge, that type of, pitch.
Come for the
to me.
culture.
Yeah, like the culture. They're like, yeah, you got to take like, customers out to lunch and dinner on the company card. And I was, in my early mid-20s, and I thought, oh, well, that sounds amazing. But I remember telling him like, you're crazy. Like, there's no way. Like, I know nothing about tech. Like, we were selling IT services was the company. It was outsourced IT services. And I thought, I know nothing about IT. I'm the last person you would want to go to about IT or tech. I know nothing about account management or sales or anything to do with business. I was like, you're barking up the wrong tree. Like, no experience doing this. I have no, business even being in the room with these people. And luckily, he was someone who saw a lot of potential in me from like the soft skills, and he saw my work ethic and was like, just, you have to trust me. Like, you will excel in this role. I know that you have like the traits and the soft skills that will make a great account manager. And you just got to like take my word for it. And, luckily having kind of his, his almost stamp of approval, or kind of his, motivation to take that leap really empowered me to go for it and get that job. And then everything kind of started to, snowball from there, just after getting into tech and into sales specifically. So
Yeah. How did you go about finding that mentor then? I know everyone says, a mentor is so important to have in your career. Obviously, your mentor helped open doors for you.
yeah.
How would you encourage someone to find that mentor? And I guess, how did you connect with your mentor?
Yeah, I think mentors can come about in a couple different ways. Sometimes they're very organic. He and I had worked very closely at the university, and we were kind of a core group of kind of friends that had, formulated at that job specifically. And so still friends to this day with that core group, 15 years later, we keep in contact and in close touch. But so I think sometimes it just organically happens where you find someone who sees potential in you and they kind of take you under your wing, and it's not like a formalized, like, hey, will you be my mentor? But, I've always really prided myself on not burning bridges and really like establishing close relationships with the people that I work with, so that, you never know when your paths are going to cross again. And that's a great example of how you can like use those relationships to help you get inroads into other opportunities down the road. And sometimes you can do it in a more formulaic way, right? Like finding people in the community or in similar circles or industries that could offer you like advice or experience that would be beneficial in your career, right? And so you can be more intentional about it and reaching out to say, hey, would love to pick your brain over coffee or treat you to coffee so that we can, chat about these specific questions or maybe things that I have in my career that I'd love to learn from you. And now that I've gotten a little bit older, I try to be that for some of the younger generation, especially people on my team. But yeah, I think it can kind of come about in both ways, either organically or more like intentionally. And I recommend people, explore both options.
Yeah, I think, Jess, that's great advice. It is almost a theme that comes up on the show a lot, talking about how like you don't really know where your next opportunity is going to come from.
Yeah.
And so just making those organic connections and being open to seeing where they go. I think that's the huge part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Still to this day, I mean, I try and keep in touch with old coworkers, old bosses, again, like never burning a bridge, and establishing really great relationships, not even just within sales, but I feel like another really key component that I've always been very intentional about is establishing relationships with people in departments outside of sales too. So like CS and marketing and product. And I think it not only helps you in your career and your job in the moment, having those really good advocates internally, but also long term, like you said, you never know when your paths are going to cross again, and someone goes and starts a startup that is an engineer, and you made an impression on them as a sales rep. They'll bring you on board as the first sales rep in their company potentially.
Yeah. And actually, I want to touch on that. That's a really good segue into how you ended up at Workshop. So I'd love if you could walk us through that career journey. You started as sales rep number 1, and
Yep.
now you're VP of sales. So
Yes, yeah.
can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I had worked with the co-founders previously at another startup here in town called Flywheel, and I guess maybe made enough of an impression that they were interested in having a conversation with me again when they started Workshop. And so we had talked a little bit about what they were building here. The product hadn't even really gone to market yet. It wasn't even fully built. So it's a little unheard of sometimes to like bring on a sales rep before you even have a product. And so that was a little odd or strange at first, but I thought it was a really good opportunity to help build and shape what the product could be, and also to get a little bit more exposure for me. I think the thing that was really interesting about it was getting to be much more involved in the marketing side and the go-to-market side, and how to build kind of a brand and how to kind of build a lead funnel. Those were things that I had never had exposure to before. So for me, I saw it as a really good growth opportunity to like help be a part of that from day one, despite the fact that maybe there wasn't a product to sell day one, right? But I learned so much about our persona and our customer through being there in early stages, which was hugely beneficial to then kind of the success that we ended up seeing once the product did launch and went to market. So but yeah, started in February of 2021 alongside with our VP of marketing, and have helped grow that team, I guess, from a single salesperson to now a team of 21 of us, and 3 managers total, and account executives and BDRs and sales engineers. So it's been really exciting ride, and in what feels like a really short amount of time. Yeah, it's been really cool to see some of the growth of the company in itself too. We have customers like household names, Panera Bread, Papa John's, Sony, et cetera. And it's been really amazing to see kind of like that take off so quickly, and to have those types of customers to get to work with day in and day out.
Yeah, wow, that's a really cool journey. And I think it's awesome that your mindset going into that was like, this is a really great opportunity to work closely with the go-to-market teams, with your VP of marketing, and looking at it as a way to really develop your skills as a salesperson before even having a product to sell. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, you were tasked with then building a team then from the ground up. So how or what key factors do you feel contributed to your success in building that team? And share a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I knew from day one, even, the path was not charted day one. It wasn't like, hey, Jess, you're going to lead this team and you're going to be VP of sales someday. That was never really the discussion. I knew that an opportunity like that would be a potential or present, but I wanted to be able to like earn it, right? And either way, I knew I was in it for the long haul, and I was committed to Workshop. So I wanted to set up our team for success, even if I wasn't going to be the leader. And so really early on, I invested in 2 things that I think helped a lot. One was I just documented everything. Even if I felt like it wasn't worthwhile documenting, I documented it. Like every process, every little bit of intel I found out about competitors, every little bit of intel or feedback I got on the product, how people responded to pricing. Because as we were kind of experimenting with like, what does pricing look like? How do we like structure that? Those were all things that I just like continued to document, because I knew someday it would come in handy. I was like, we're going to scale the team. We'll have more people, and you can't just have the knowledge live in your head forever. Eventually you have to have some sort of process or documentation in place to make that scalable. And so I did a ton of documenting, and I still to this day, anytime we hire new roles, we just hired a new partnerships account manager in July, brand new to the company, first position in that role. And I said, just document everything you do, because someday you'll have a team around you, and maybe you'll be leading that team, and you will be thankful that you have it all on paper. So that was the first thing. And then I think the second thing, also along the lines of documentation, was just starting to track data. And we were lucky enough to have a CRM from day one. So I set up the CRM in a way that I knew would be advantageous or beneficial for us as we grew, so that, yes, we have no data the first 6 months or even really the first year that's worthwhile. But if you don't start day one and tracking some of that data, like who are the companies you're talking to, what sizes are they, what are the titles that end up purchasing or buying, who ends up converting, what is the conversion rate, all those little pieces of information that typically go in a CRM, a year and a half in, 2 years in, you're going to want to look back at all that data from previous and from before when you thought it wasn't that important to be tracking that stuff. And if you don't have a CRM, like, honestly, just do it old school on an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet, right? Like our first BDR, when he was starting to find success, I said, track every meeting you book, track, what their title was, how big their company was, and track, what sequence or what template you use to get them to book the meeting. And that will start to help you understand, okay, what's working, what's not working. You can start to find little trends and themes in there. So I think those two things were like super critical, just from like a very tactical operational standpoint, to have that baseline. And then you can always kind of grow and build upon from there. So
yeah, I think obviously you're very detail oriented, and it sounds like you developed those skills, such as, hey, I know how to set up a CRM. I know how to track this data. Sounds like you developed those from previous sales experience. How would you encourage, maybe besides that being extremely detail oriented piece, how would you encourage someone who has aspirations to become a sales leader someday? What skills should they develop?
Yeah, I mean, our COO has this phrase that I love, and it's like, be a student of the game, and probably relevant to a lot of, the people who might be watching is, just because you land the job doesn't mean you stop learning, right? And so like always continually pushing to like learn and self motivate yourself to like take that extra initiative and step. I think it's super important for companies to invest and develop in their employees, but I also find it much more impactful when we can take ownership over our own learning and development. So a lot of the stuff, I mean, the internet's so powerful now, right? Like you can find almost the answer to anything online, it seems like. But I will say like probably the biggest unlocks for me have been specifically SaaS sales books and podcasts, and learning, what are other people in this space or that have been in my shoes before doing, and what are they looking out for? How are they structuring things? What do I need to maybe be keeping an eye out as I grow this team or as I grow professionally? So I'd say like podcasts and books have been huge for me. I listen to podcasts almost every single morning on the way to work, related specifically to like SaaS and sales and leadership.
I got to hear what you would plug for your favorite podcast then, and then a book that you'd recommend too.
Yeah, so I will say right now I'm really into this podcast called 30 Minutes to President's Club, and I like it because they have different kind of tracks. And it's like, if you're an individual contributor, there's tracks on like how to be a great sales rep, how to be a great BDR, but also like tracks on leadership, like how to, transition from being an individual contributor into a sales leader. So they have all these different kind of like guest speakers that come on, and it's very actionable takeaways, which I love. So that one's like on the rotation. And then there's a second one that I listen to quite frequently called SaaStr, and it's with Jason Lemkin, and pull a lot of like his it's more like strategy of like how to structure things like go to market and sales teams. And so I lean on that very heavily for like advice on if we are launching a new product, how do you position that, and kind of the steps to be considering in that process.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. Really tangible advice. I wrote both of those down. So I feel like anyone listening, start there. I love it.
Yeah.
So then I would love to know a little bit more too. You built out this whole sales team.
Yeah.
What advice, or I guess let's take one step back. When you're hiring for a sales team, what attributes are you looking for in candidates? Any red flags that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it depends if we're hiring, a BDR candidate or an account executive candidate. And, for our BDR candidates, I actually focus way less on like the experience. In fact, a lot of our BDRs come from straight out of college, so they don't have a lot of sales experience. And that to me is completely okay. In fact, like I embrace that. And I think it really comes down to more of like the soft skills and the traits. And of course, for account executives, a lot of times you do want to see that experience and kind of that resume of relevant sales experience. So we look at that particularly for that role. But in terms of soft skills, I oftentimes weigh that much more heavily in the hiring process. And the traits that I really look for are coachability and like kind of that lifelong learner mentality. So people who are willing to like learn and unlearn. One, because sales is just such a fast moving industry and role. And especially if you're in tech sales, it is very fast moving and constantly evolving and changing. And you need to have kind of that ability to adapt quickly and to learn new things and to like learn from your failures and your experiences essentially. So I think that trait specifically I look for. At Workshop, we have a value called We Look on the Bright Side. It's, we look for people who are optimistic. And it's not only a company value, but for me, it's also like a core sales value because sales is tough, right? Like if anyone has worked in sales for any number of years, it's not always like all roses, right?
Yeah.
Very roller coastery. The lows are low and everyone has bad months, sometimes even bad years in sales. And having an optimistic or kind of a positive mindset is what gets me through in sales. And I think that is a trait that cannot be undervalued at all because I find that mindset of people who are optimistic are much more successful than those that aren't in sales by and large. So I'd say those are probably the top two traits. And then the third one, honestly, it's maybe sounds a little cliche, but just someone who's like personable, right? Like someone I can sit down and have a conversation with and like they get energy from being around other people. They ask great questions, they're great conversationalists. And, I think there's this old phrase in sales where like people buy from people they like. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that because at the end of the day, the prospect has to have a pain. You need to be able to solve that pain, right? In order for there to be a fit. But I do think that people also evaluate their experience in the sales process. And to me, that's really hugely impactful is creating a great experience. And anyone can follow a script. Anyone can follow kind of a discovery question that's outlined. But if I can have a really natural human conversation with someone and create a great experience for them in the sales process, it makes an impression and it makes an impact and it helps build trust in that sales process so that they are more likely to, remember and have a memorable experience and come back to you when they're ready to buy or when they are making that decision of who they're going to go with.
Yeah, I work with a lot of candidates here at Shift who are those fresh out of college students that maybe don't have the sales experience. And I'm curious on your perspective on this. We see one thing we believe at Shift Group is that the resume is pretty outdated. It doesn't truly tell the full story of the value a candidate can bring to companies. So I'd love to know if there's any ways you've seen candidates stand out, whether it's in the interview process or is it the resume for you? Is there something that you're looking for specifically when you're starting that interview process with candidates?
Yeah. On the BDR side, I will say, I don't know if this is the right or wrong answer, but I rarely look at the resume, to be honest. On the AE side, of course I do, because I'm looking for things like have they run a sales process, a sales cycle, even if it's something like in retail or not in tech specifically, but I'm looking for some of that relevant experience. I think what really makes a candidate stand out to me particularly are, how is my conversation with them on Zoom or in person, however we're doing the interview format, but also to something that makes an impression to me and something that I feel like is pretty rare these days is how are they following up with me and how quickly are they following up with me? Because it's very indicative to me of how they would manage their deals or their leads. If you're going through an interview process, it is very similar to how you would manage maybe a sales process. So like immediately jumping off the interview and sending a quick like, hey, it was so great to chat with you. I loved learning about X, Y, and Z and looking forward to next steps. Are they setting a next step on the interview? Are they, trying to uncover potential objections? I almost look at it as like a mini sales demo in that interview process. And it's a huge indicator for me how they would actually handle a sales process. From beginning to end. So that's something that I always kind of have in the back of my mind.
I love that, Jess. I'm smiling because that was just like a gold mine for me with some of the candidates I work with. That is something we are trying to emphasize all the time. Like those little things matter. The follow-up matters. You closing on the interview, asking for, hey, what are those objections? Like you're going to face objections every day in sales. So confront it head on in the interview process as well. So I'm just like, I loved that answer. That was awesome. So on that same note, or maybe same vein, I would just love to know what advice you would have for candidates who are looking to break into sales, especially in the tech space.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, like, I would say, putting yourself out there. The best salespeople I know are very assertive and proactive in their careers. So putting yourself out there on LinkedIn, putting yourself out there on networking opportunities, not being afraid to ask the question. If you know someone who works at a really cool startup or company, like, reach out to them, be like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about your experience here. I would love to learn more about this company. Even if there's not an open role, a lot of, and it doesn't have to be a hiring manager always, right? It can be like another AE at that company. It can be a BDR at that company. It could be someone on the marketing team for, all that matters. If you have some sort of mutual connection with that person, that's always kind of good to be able to leverage that or use that to help get the conversation going. But I would say kind of putting yourself out there and not being afraid to just make the ask. And quite frankly, again, going back to the sales thing, that's sales, is like making the ask, and prospecting and really positioning why it would be valuable or worth their time for them to meet with you, so that you can learn more about their company and also what you can bring to the table potentially, and focusing, I think, how you can pair maybe some of your experience and skills directly to what they're doing. I feel like it's always helpful if you can do a lot of research about the company ahead of time to show that you're really knowledgeable and have invested in that time. And people are much more likely to want to invest back if you've done some of that ahead of time as well.
Yeah, one thing you just mentioned there that I think is super important is relating your experience to why it would matter for the company or how it relates to what they do. I work with a lot of candidates that are trying to develop their story.
Yeah.
And when going through the interview process, and that is a huge piece. Like, you could have the best story in the world, but unless the company sees why it matters for them, it could be tough to translate. So I think that was a great point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of examples where, there's different types of sales roles, right? There's sales roles that are very like small dollar value and more transactional. And then there's sales roles that are more complex and more higher dollar value. And if you research a little bit of that up front, you can then start to make correlations of like, okay, where have I maybe managed a more complex process or a more complex relationship where I can like relate that to that sales cycle? Or where have I maybe been able to handle things at velocity and handle and juggle a lot of things in a very quick turnaround fashion to relate to a more like smaller deal cycle or shorter deal cycle and transactional type of sale, right?
Yeah, I love it. Jess, we only have a few minutes left here, so I want to touch on just two more questions.
Yeah.
One is just more about you. We tend to really wrap our value and what we're doing for work. I think I'm super guilty of that at times. And so I just want to know really what fills your cup outside of work.
Yeah. I'm guilty of that as well too, I would say. But I try and spend a lot of time just being a really well-rounded person, right? So like going to the gym, taking care of myself as like, from a health perspective, I think is super important. So I'm pretty invested in that. I did just get a dog over the summer. We adopted a dog. And so I spend a lot of time with her now.
I don't know, what kind of dog did you get?
So she's a little bit of a mix of a lot of things, but everyone always thinks she's a golden doodle. She's like Old English sheepdog and lab and poodle and border collie and Great Pyrenees, like just a whole mix of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, dogs. I love dogs. I could go on about that. But anyway, sorry,
Yeah.
I had to interrupt. Awesome. Okay, very cool. Last final question for you, Jess. Since the premise of the show was originally aimed to encourage women to get into sales with the massive opportunity there is for them. So I would love to know what advice you would specifically offer to women who are maybe still considering a career in sales, maybe haven't taken that leap yet.
Yeah. I would say, like, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to speak up. I think that was something really early on in my career, like the story I mentioned earlier. Like, I didn't believe in myself. I think oftentimes women have a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I'm certainly guilty of that in a lot of facets of my life. But I think have that confidence and, don't be afraid to brag a little bit.
Wow.
Like a lot of times we want to be really humble, and there is such a thing as humble confidence, but also too, like, you know, you deserve a seat at the table as well. So don't be afraid to like raise your hand and speak up.
Amazing. Agreed. Thank you so much, Jess, for your time today. This was awesome. I love just personally being able to reconnect with you again and have you share all of your insights with our listeners. Can I encourage anyone to connect with you on LinkedIn, Jess Spangler Workshop?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. Thank you everyone for listening. I will see you next week.
All right. Thanks.